The year is 1941. The place, the Mediterranean Sea, south of Greece. It is a night of profound inky blackness. A British task force led by Admiral Andrew Cunningham is hunting Italian warships. Aboard the flagship HMS Warspite, the crew strains against the impenetrable darkness. Human eyes are useless. The vast ocean swallows all light, all sound, all hope of detection. Then, from the radar room, a voice. Calm, precise, cutting through the tension. Contact, bearing, range, enemy force detected. On the bridge, Admiral Cunningham receives the report. Impossible. They are still miles from where the enemy could be, yet the electronic pulses on the primitive green screen insist otherwise. His fleet is sailing blind, but something is giving them sight. A ghost in the machine, whispering secrets from the void. What happened next would echo through every admiralty, every shipyard, every naval academy for generations. In the pitch black, with no moon, no stars, the British battle line, equipped with this strange new technology, unleashed a torrent of fire. Battleships like Warspite, Valiant, and Barham, their massive 15-inch guns thundering, found their targets with chilling accuracy. The Italian cruisers and destroyers, caught completely by surprise, were illuminated by shell splashes, then consumed by fire. 3 heavy cruisers, Zara, Fiume, Pola, and 2 destroyers were sunk in a matter of minutes, almost without reply. This was the Battle of Cape Matapan. And it was a slaughter, but this was not merely a victory. It was a revelation. It was the moment the ancient rules of naval warfare, steeped in centuries of tradition, were irrevocably rewritten. For the first time, in the chaos and impenetrable night of modern combat, the impossible had become possible. One side could see, and the other could not. And the secret to this newfound sight wasn't a powerful new gun, or a faster engine, or a bigger ship. It was a humble, experimental device, still in its infancy, a device called radar. And it all began with one unassuming Scottish scientist, decades before the first shot was even fired. To truly understand the magnitude of this transformation, we must first cast our minds back to an era when naval power was absolute. For millennia, the success or failure of a fleet hinged on human perception. Commanders stood on their bridges, binoculars pressed to their eyes, scanning the horizon. Weather, fog, darkness, all dictated the terms of engagement. Night battles, when they occurred, were chaotic, often accidental affairs. Ships fired blindly, relying on luck, flares, and the fleeting silhouettes of their adversaries. The risk of friendly fire was immense. The age of the dreadnoughts, beginning in the early 20th century, only amplified this strategic dilemma. These steel leviathans, armed with colossal guns and protected by thick armor, represented the pinnacle of industrial might. They were designed for daylight slugging matches, where superior optics and gunnery drills dictated the victor. But what good was a 15-inch gun if you couldn't see your target beyond a few hundred yards? What good was an armored behemoth if a smaller, unseen enemy could launch torpedoes from the darkness? Naval doctrine itself was shaped by these limitations. Grand fleet actions, like the Battle of Jutland in 1916, often broke off at dusk, commanders unwilling to risk their valuable assets in the perilous darkness. Navies built powerful ships, but they were still, fundamentally, blind at night. This was the contradiction at the heart of naval strategy: immense power, yet utterly dependent on the fickle gift of daylight. This problem, however, was about to meet its solution, not on a battleship's bridge, but in the quiet, unassuming laboratories of interwar Britain. Our story shifts from the high seas to the world of radio waves and electrical currents, and to a man whose early work seemed far removed from the roar of naval guns. Robert Watson Watt was a meteorologist by trade, a quiet, brilliant mind fascinated by the power of radio waves. He wasn't focused on warfare, but on understanding the invisible forces of the atmosphere. In the early 1930s, as tensions grew across Europe, British military planners began to fret. The rise of Nazi Germany, with its burgeoning air force, presented a terrifying new threat: aerial bombardment. Britain was an island, but could it withstand an attack from the skies? The existing acoustic listening devices were hopelessly inadequate. A faster, more reliable method of aircraft detection was desperately needed. The Air Ministry, desperate for solutions, approached Watson Watt. They had a fanciful idea. Could radio waves be used to create a death ray capable of destroying aircraft? Watson Watt, with his characteristic pragmatism, quickly dismissed the death ray concept as impossible. But then a flash of insight. What if, instead of destroying aircraft, radio waves could detect them? In February 1935, a pivotal experiment took place at Daventry, England. Watson Watt and his assistant, Arnold Wilkins, set up a powerful shortwave radio transmitter. Miles away, a receiver was connected to a cathode ray oscilloscope, a device that displayed electronic signals as traces on a screen. A Handley Page Hayford bomber. a large biplane, was instructed to fly between the transmitter and receiver. As the bomber passed, a distinct blip appeared on the oscilloscope screen. It was crude, it was fuzzy, but it was unmistakable. Watson Watt knew, with absolute certainty, that they had found something profound. This was the Daventry experiment, and it was the eureka moment that launched the era of radar. The British government, recognizing the immense potential, took a technological gamble. They poured resources into Watson Watt's team, racing against time to develop this primitive technology into a working air defense system. This initial focus was entirely on detecting incoming bombers. The result was the Chain Home Network, a series of massive radar stations strategically placed along Britain's coastline. The Chain Home was clumsy, expensive, and visually imposing. Its towering antenna arrays stood like metallic sentinels against the sky. Many in the military establishment remained skeptical, clinging to traditional methods of observation. But in the summer of 1940, when the German Air Force unleashed its full might during the Battle of Britain, the gamble paid off. The Chain Home provided the Royal Air Force with vital early warnings, guiding fighter squadrons to intercept German formations with unprecedented efficiency. German pilots flying Heinkel He 111 bombers and Messerschmitt Ff 109 fighters found themselves constantly ambushed, their surprise attacks thwarted before they could even reach their targets. While the Battle of Britain raged in the skies, a different kind of desperation was growing at sea. The German U-boat menace was choking Britain's supply lines, sending hundreds of merchant ships to the bottom of the Atlantic. German surface raiders, powerful battleships like the Bismarck and pocket battleships like the Graf Spee, slipped into the vast ocean, posing an existential threat to convoys. The Royal Navy, despite its size, was still battling a fundamental problem: how to find the enemy in the vastness of the ocean, especially at night or in bad weather. The success of air defense radar had not gone unnoticed by naval planners. If radio waves could detect aircraft, surely they could detect ships. But the challenge of adapting radar for sea use was immense. Land-based stations were static, massive, and operated in relatively stable environments. Ships, however, pitched and rolled, were constantly exposed to salt spray and had limited space and power. Early naval radar sets were crude, often temperamental, and consumed vast amounts of power. Their antenna arrays were smaller, less powerful, and vulnerable to the harsh marine environment. The first naval radar sets, known initially as RDF, radio direction finding, and later as radar, were truly pioneering efforts. They were primitive, bulky black boxes with even cruder display screens. A blip might appear amidst a storm of static, indicating a contact somewhere out there, but its precise identity and course were often a mystery. Many Royal Navy captains, steeped in centuries of maritime tradition, viewed these black boxes with deep suspicion. They preferred their trusted sextants, their compasses, their carefully honed instincts honed over decades at sea. The idea of trusting a flickering green line on a screen over their own experienced eyes seemed, to many, preposterous. Initial trials were fraught with frustration. Radar operators were often young, inexperienced ratings trying to make sense of a technology that even its inventors barely understood. The range was short, the resolution poor, and sea clutter, reflections from waves, often obscured any real targets. There were embarrassing incidents where radar reports led ships on wild goose chases, chasing phantom enemies that turned out to be nothing more than particularly large waves or flocks of seabirds. This was the profound narrative contrast. The early promise of radar for air defense seemed to clash with its frustrating limitations at sea. Yet, the strategic imperative was too great to ignore. The Battle of the Atlantic demanded innovation. The relentless depredations of German U-boat wolfpacks were pushing Britain to the brink of starvation. A single undetected U-boat at night could devastate an entire convoy. The hunt for these silent predators became a deadly game of cat and mouse. One of the first significant applications of radar in the naval war wasn't on battleships, but on aircraft. Coastal Command's patrol planes, flying tirelessly over the Atlantic, were given airborne search to surface vessel radar, or ASV. These early sets, though still rudimentary, could detect U-boats on the surface at night or in thick fog, when they were most vulnerable while recharging their batteries. The immediate consequence was dramatic. U-boat losses began to climb. German U-boat commanders, who had previously felt safe on the surface at night, suddenly found themselves caught in the glare of searchlights, subjected to depth charge attacks from unseen aircraft. The hunters were becoming the hunted. It was against this backdrop of escalating war at sea that the stage was set for the critical moment off Cape Matapan. The Mediterranean was a vital artery for Britain, a precarious lifeline to its empire. In March 1941, intelligence reports indicated a large Italian fleet, including the powerful battleship Vittorio Veneto, was planning to intercept British convoys. Admiral Cunningham, commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet, was determined to engage. Cunningham's fleet was a mixture of battle-hardened veterans and some of the Royal Navy's most advanced ships. Critically, some of his ships, particularly the battleships, were equipped with the latest Type 279 and Type 286 radar sets. These were still far from perfect, but they represented the cutting edge of Allied technology. The stage was set for a classic naval encounter, but with a hidden advantage for one side. The engagement began in daylight, with inconclusive skirmishes. The Italian Admiral Angelo Iachino, commanding the Vittorio Veneto, was initially successful in evading the British, relying on his ship's speed. But as dusk fell, Cunningham saw his opportunity. He knew the Italian doctrine favored disengagement in darkness, avoiding night combat at all costs due to their lack of effective night fighting equipment. What Iachino didn't know was that Cunningham's ships now possessed an entirely new dimension of perception. As the inky blackness descended, the British battleships Warspite, Valiant, and Barham continued their pursuit. Aboard Warspite, the radar screen, a small glowing green circle, showed a series of faint blips. These were the Italian ships. The radar operators, huddled in their dimly lit compartment, fed continuous reports to the bridge, bearing changing, range closing. Targets identified as large units. Admiral Cunningham ordered his fleet to close the range. The crews prepared for action in the darkness, a situation that just months before would have been considered suicidal. The Royal Navy ships maintained radio silence, their approach a silent, deadly ballet guided by the pulses of radio waves. Just before 11 p.m., the blips on the Warspite's radar screen resolved into clear, distinct targets. The range was dangerously close. Then, the command. Engage. The night exploded. The British battleships opened fire at point-blank range, their massive guns spitting orange flames into the darkness. The first salvos from Warspite's 15-inch guns struck the Italian cruiser Fiume with devastating force. The Italians, completely unaware of the approaching enemy until the shell splashes erupted around them, were caught in a horrifying dilemma. They could see nothing, yet they were being torn apart by an invisible enemy. Their turrets traversed frantically, their own guns firing in desperate, uncoordinated volleys at shadows. The shock and confusion were absolute. Within minutes, the Italian ships were crippled. Fiume and Zara were shattered, burning wrecks. The cruiser Pola, already damaged from an earlier attack, became a helpless target. British destroyers moved in, delivering the coup de grace with torpedoes. The scene was one of utter destruction, a testament to the power of unseen detection. The irony was profound. The Italian fleet, designed for speed and long-range engagement, was annihilated in a close-quarters night battle, precisely the scenario they had sought to avoid. The Battle of Cape Matapan sent shockwaves through the Axis powers. The British had achieved an impossible victory, sinking a significant portion of the Italian fleet without suffering a single loss of their own. It was clear that some new decisive factor was at play. German intelligence analysts scrambled to understand what had happened. They suspected a new form of detection, but its full capabilities and pervasive presence across the British fleet remained a mystery. Matapan provided irrefutable proof of radar's strategic value in naval combat. Its success spurred rapid development and deployment. British scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, refining existing sets and developing new ones. Range and resolution improved dramatically. Displays became more sophisticated. Radar moved from being a crude detection device to an integral part of ship operations. The technology was shared with the Americans, who were also developing their own radar systems, such as the CA-GAM and later the SG sets. As the United States entered the war, naval radar became a top priority. In the vastness of the Pacific, where distances were immense and weather unpredictable, radar proved even more crucial. The early naval engagements in the Pacific, particularly around Guadalcanal, highlighted both the incredible potential and the painful learning curve of radar. In the chaotic night Battle of Savo Island in August 1942, American forces, though equipped with radar, failed to effectively use it, suffering a devastating defeat at the hands of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Crews were inexperienced, communication was poor, and some commanders distrusted the new technology. The consequence of this failure was tragic. 4 Allied heavy cruisers sunk, but lessons were learned quickly. Within months at the Battle of Cape Esperance in October 1942, American destroyers and cruisers, now more proficient in radar operation, turned the tables. In a pitch-black night with no visible moon, the American ships detected the approaching Japanese force. They opened fire, catching the Japanese completely by surprise, sinking 1 cruiser and 1 destroyer, and severely damaging others. This was a direct echo of Matapan, proving that the earlier failures were not due to radar's limitations, but to human error and inexperience. Throughout the Pacific War, radar became the eyes and ears of the US Navy, giving them an overwhelming advantage in night actions. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers could cross the T, a classic naval maneuver where one fleet sails across the enemy's lead ship, allowing all its guns to bear in total darkness. The Japanese, despite their formidable fighting spirit and excellent optics, found themselves in the same predicament as the Italians at Matapan. They were often detected before they could see their adversaries, frequently suffering devastating losses before they could even fire a single shot effectively. This narrative contrast, the blind Japanese against the radar-equipped Americans, was a recurring and devastating theme in the Pacific. From its humble beginnings, detecting a single bomber, radar rapidly evolved. It wasn't just for surface combat. Airborne radar on planes became essential for anti-submarine warfare, denying U-boats safe haven on the surface. Anti-aircraft radar guided shipboard guns, dramatically improving their accuracy against incoming enemy aircraft, shifting from desperate barrages to precise targeting. Radar became crucial for navigation, allowing ships to operate safely through fog and darkness, and for identifying friendly forces in crowded waters. By the war's end, radar had transformed every aspect of naval warfare. The blind ships of the pre-war era were gone, replaced by vessels bristling with electronic sensors. The ability to see beyond the horizon, through darkness and through storms, had fundamentally altered naval doctrine, strategy, and tactics. Night no longer offered sanctuary. Bad weather no longer guaranteed cover. The invisible forces of the electromagnetic spectrum had been harnessed, giving humanity a sixth sense in the brutal theater of war. Robert Watson Watt, the quiet meteorologist, never fired a gun in anger. His invention, born from a desire to track lightning and improve weather forecasting, became one of the most decisive technologies of the 20th century. It was a technological gamble that paid off beyond imagination, overturning centuries of naval tradition and ultimately contributing to the Allied victory. The story of radar is more than just the tale of a scientific breakthrough. It is a profound historical irony, an invention initially met with skepticism, then deployed for one purpose that ultimately revolutionized an entirely different domain, giving sight to the blind and clarity to chaos. The transformation of naval warfare, from a realm defined by human perception to one dominated by electronic senses, forever changed how nations project power across the oceans. From the tense moments in a radar room at Matapan to the vast radar-guided fleets of today, one scientist's vision, channeled through invisible waves, continues to shape the destiny of nations at sea. It reminds us that sometimes, the greatest leaps in human endeavor come from the most unexpected places, and from the quietest minds.